Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe so I can tell more interesting stories. Now, let's get started. It started on a Tuesday. I was walking through the cereal aisle halfway between granola clusters and emotional collapse when a wave of heat hit me like I had just walked into a furnace. Not just a little warm, not maybe the air conditioning's off kind of heat. I mean molten, like my skin was microwaving itself from the inside out. And just like that, my life changed. No warning, no dramatic music. No, your journey into menopause begins now pamphlet delivered by a wise, cracking fairy godmother. Just sweat confusion and a half-melted chocolate bar I was too embarrassed to explain at checkout. You think you'll recognize the big changes in life. You think there'll be signs. But menopause, it slips in quietly. Stealth mode. One day, you're yourself, and the next you're staring blankly at your own front door, wondering if you left your keys in the freezer again. At first, I chalked it up to stress. I was working late, skipping breakfast, yelling at the toaster. You know modern life. But then came the mood swings, the fog, the feeling that my brain was buffering like a YouTube video on bad Wi-Fi. I wasn't just changing, I was vanishing. Historians still debate whether ancient cultures revered or feared women at this stage. In some tribes, menopausal women became wisdom keepers. In others, they were carted off to the edge of society like expired coupons. Either way, the fact that they noticed seems oddly comforting. Because now, most people just don't want to talk about it. Even my doctor didn't want to talk about it. I remember sitting in the clinic, listing off my symptoms, like I was describing a haunted house. Strange noises, chills, things disappearing without explanation. She smiled and said, "It's probably just aging." I half expected her to hand me a candle and a map to the underworld. So I did what any woman with an internet connection and mild panic would do. I Googled it. Big mistake. Early dementia, said one site. Unstable personality, warned another. One forum suggested I meditate in a salt cave while chewing fennel seeds and reciting positive affirmations to my liver. And yet, none of it felt wrong. That's what scared me most. See, there's no one-size-fits-all for menopause. Some women breeze through it like they've got internal AC. Others, like me, walk barefoot through emotional fire, hoping someone left a trail of hormone gummies behind them. I started writing notes to myself. Sticky notes, digital notes, notes on my arm in eyeliner. Little reminders of who I was when I still recognized myself. Drink water. Breathe. You're not losing your mind. One night, I sat in the dark fan on full blast window open, even though it was snowing, and I whispered to myself, "You're still here. You're still you." Because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of me. It was a strange, uncomfortable, sweat-drenched beginning. That first flash in the cereal aisle, it was the start of my body's second act. And as terrifying as that moment was, it also marked the first time I truly listened to my body. Not to criticize it, not to shame it, but to understand it. I didn't know it yet, but that was everything. My doctor shrugged, literally. A half-hearted shrug, like the kind you give when someone asks if you want fries with that. "It's probably just hormones," she said almost apologetically. Like hormones were a stray cat that wandered in and knocked over my mental furniture. I sat there blinking. I had just described crying at an oatmeal commercial, forgetting my own phone number, and waking up drenched in sweat, like I'd been chased by a dream I couldn't remember. And that was all she had, hormones. So I nodded politely, left the office, and did what any woman on the edge of unraveling would do. I started digging. I researched. I read. I joined forums. I fell down rabbit holes so deep I half expected to find Alice with a fan and an ice pack. It was like trying to put together IKEA furniture without instructions. I had all the pieces, none of the guidance, and about 3 extra screws that rattled ominously in my brain. Here's the thing. They don't tell you about this phase of life. It's not just your body changing. It's your trust in yourself that starts to crack. I had always prided myself on being sharp, focused, the person you could count on to remember birthdays and passwords and which outlet sparked when you plugged in the blender. But now, my brain was turning into a foggy swamp where thoughts sank like lost treasure. Historians still debate whether Cleopatra experienced menopause and if she did, how she handled it. Some say she may have used herbs and elixirs from the Nile to calm her nerves. Others believe she just had people fanning her 24/7 and shouting affirmations in ancient Egyptian. Meanwhile, I was trying not to cry in the middle of a Zoom meeting because someone used the phrase touch base. I wanted answers, real ones, not just it's natural or you'll get through it. I wanted to understand what was happening to me. I wanted to know what estrogen really did, besides give me curves and moods. I wanted to know why one day I felt like I could conquer the world, and the next I couldn't conquer my laundry pile. That's when I discovered something that truly floored me. Despite affecting every woman on the planet at some point, menopause is woefully under-researched. Medical schools barely cover it. Pharmaceutical companies rarely prioritize it. And mainstream media, unless it's a punchline or a sad subplot, forget it. It's like we all agreed to stop talking about it after a certain age. Like a collective hush fell over an entire chapter of womanhood. And I didn't want to be quiet anymore. So I started keeping a menopause journal. Not the poetic kind with lavender pages and inspirational quotes. More like a survival log. Day 14, thought I was dying. Turned out to be gas. Also cried during a cat food commercial. Day 22, Googled can hormones make you hate your husband for chewing. Day 31, realized I forgot to pay my credit card. Also forgot I had a credit card. Somewhere in that mess of self-discovery, I started to laugh again. Not because it was funny, but because it had to be. If I couldn't laugh at waking up at 3 a.m. to change my sweaty pajamas for the 4th night in a row, then I was going to lose my mind completely. And let's be honest, there's something a little magical about laughing when you feel like everything else is falling apart. I began tracking symptoms, comparing notes, even sketching weird little cartoons of my hormonal gremlins. They had names. One was Ragey Rachel. Another was Forgetful Fiona. And then there was Meltdown Mel, who only appeared when I couldn't decide what to cook. That kind of absurdity, it saved me. Because even as I started digging into science and data and case studies, what helped me the most was this knowing I wasn't alone. Every late-night forum post, every tired meme, every whispered me too from a woman in line behind me at the pharmacy, it was like building a secret club of survivors. We weren't just women going through the change. We were transforming. Even if we didn't fully understand what we were becoming yet. And for the first time, instead of feeling like a stranger in my own skin, I felt seen. Mood swings are cute when they happen to toddlers. Not so much when they're coming from a grown woman who used to keep it together so well she could have led a hostage negotiation. One minute I was making tea and humming along to the radio, and the next I was snapping at the toaster for taking too long. The emotional whiplash was unreal. It didn't help that my brain decided to check out around the same time. I would walk into a room and forget why I was there. Open the fridge, stare, and realize I had no idea what I was looking for. I lost my car keys, my passwords, and one time, briefly, my dignity when I teared up watching a dog reunion video on my lunch break. They don't warn you about this part. They tell you menopause is about hot flashes and maybe some mild emotional changes, But this was more like being possessed by 12 versions of myself, and not the fun ones. No, these ladies had opinions, and they were always just below the surface, ready to cry, shout, or spiral, depending on the lighting and what was in the pantry. Historians still debate whether Queen Elizabeth I experienced menopause symptoms in silence, or whether she too yelled at her servants for bringing her the wrong kind of berries. We may never know. What we do know is that emotional instability during this phase is not only common, it's expected. That doesn't make it any easier when your family starts tiptoeing around you like you're a ticking time bomb in sweatpants. And yet, there was something fascinating about watching my emotional responses shift so dramatically. It was like getting to know myself all over again, but with fewer filters and a lot more tears. The anger wasn't new, but the intensity was. The sadness wasn't unfamiliar, but the suddenness of it, that was something else. One day, I stood in front of the mirror, mascara smudged and eyes red from a crying fit over a broken mug, and I just said out loud, "Who are you?" And the weirdest part, I kind of liked her. She was raw, unapologetic, didn't pretend to be fine when she wasn't. There was a power in that, even if it came wrapped in anxiety and unpredictable weepiness. So, I decided to stop fighting it. If my emotions were coming for me like a tsunami, I wasn't going to build a dam. I was going to learn to surf. I bought a giant wall calendar and started tracking what I called my emotional weather. Sunny days, cloudy moods, thunderstorm meltdowns. It wasn't scientific, but it helped me feel like I had some control. I even gave names to the big feelings when they showed up. Rage, that was Firestorm Fiona. Sadness, Weepy Wanda. Numbness, Foggy Fran. Once I could label them, they felt less scary, less like monsters, and more like roommates who needed boundaries. Of course, not everyone around me appreciated my new self-awareness. One night at dinner, I told my partner that I was feeling a strong, Foggy Fran moment coming on, and that I needed to leave the table and cry about my high school English teacher. He blinked twice and said, "Okay, should I save you some potatoes?" Honestly, he handled it better than I would have. The truth is, even though it was exhausting, confusing, and wildly inconvenient, this emotional roller coaster forced me to slow down, to check in with myself, to ask what I was feeling instead of just powering through. And in a weird, messy way, it made me more compassionate toward myself and toward others. I began to understand that being fine all the time is a myth, that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is have a good cry and then eat a grilled cheese while watching videos of sloths falling off tree branches. Also, fun fact, did you know that sloths can hold their breath longer than dolphins? Yeah, that's a real thing. I learned that during a particularly tearful YouTube binge that actually ended with me laughing out loud and scaring the cat. It wasn't all bad, not all the time, but it was different. And different can be terrifying when your whole identity has been built around being capable, composed, and the strong one. Menopause didn't take that from me. It just reminded me I was more than that. They used to call it the change, which frankly makes it sound like a polite transformation into a slightly less vibrant version of yourself. A gentle fade, a quiet shift. But what I was going through felt more like a hostile takeover with my brain and body as the unwilling hosts. And I couldn't stop wondering, how did women used to survive this? Before supplements and blogs and Instagram wellness coaches. So I did what any sleep-deprived, slightly sweaty amateur historian might do. I started digging into the past. Turns out, menopause and hormonal shifts have had a long and colorful history, and spoiler alert, it hasn't always been kind. In ancient Greece, doctors like Hippocrates believed that menopause was caused by uterine drying and an excess of black bile. Yeah, black bile. Like some kind of alchemical horror movie. Women were often prescribed to stay quiet, bleed themselves, with leeches, or my personal favorite ride horses vigorously to stimulate the uterus back into compliance. Historians still debate whether these remedies were based on actual observations or just a creative way for ancient men to sound like they knew what they were talking about. Either way, let's be glad we've upgraded from black bile to bioidentical hormones. In medieval Europe, things didn't improve much. Menopausal symptoms were sometimes interpreted as signs of witchcraft. Imagine having a hot flash and suddenly you're being dunked in a river to prove you're not a sorceress. Try explaining that to your insurance provider. By the Victorian era, menopause was labeled the melancholic madness. Doctors recommended bed rest corsets, and for those who could afford it, extended stays in nervous spas. Essentially, you'd be tucked away like a malfunctioning clock until your hysteria passed or your family forgot where they left you. And what were men doing during all this time? Mostly staying silent, clueless, or writing long-winded medical theories that included zero actual women. To be fair, some cultures handled it better. In certain indigenous societies, menopausal women were respected as wise elders. In Japan, the word for menopause, konenki, carries a more neutral or even positive tone, implying a stage of renewal. And in some African traditions, postmenopausal women were given more spiritual roles and community influence. It's almost like when you listen to women instead of locking them up or prescribing leeches, they turn out to be incredibly helpful human beings. Who knew? But while I found those bits of history comforting, what stuck with me most was how little things had changed in the places that mattered. Even today, the average doctor receives less than a day of formal training in menopause. That's right, a day. I've spent more time trying to choose a new phone plan. And that explains a lot, doesn't it? It explains why women like me leave their appointments feeling unseen, why we turn to chat rooms and group texts and midlife memoirs for the guidance our medical charts don't provide, why we whisper to each other in grocery store aisles and Facebook threads passing down recipes and remedies like ancient knowledge. It made me angry at first, but then it made me proud, because we've always found ways to adapt, to take what little we're given and turn it into community care and connection. We made humor out of hot flashes. We built tribes out of sweat-soaked nightgowns and fridge magnets reminding us where we left our phones. I started seeing my own experience as part of that legacy. Maybe I wasn't Cleopatra. Maybe I didn't have servants fanning me and feeding me figs. But I was figuring it out one confusing symptom and sarcastic sticky note at a time. One day, while flipping through a dusty library book on women's health, I stumbled across this old French remedy for female agitation. It involved drinking mulled wine, followed by lying in a lavender-scented room while someone read poetry aloud. Reader, I tried it, and honestly, it slapped. Not everything from history should make a comeback, but the idea of intentionally slowing down, not because you're broken, but because you're becoming someone new. That's something I could get behind. This phase of life isn't a disappearance. It's a reintroduction. With fewer filters, more honesty, and a growing realization that I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to be present, and possibly surrounded by poetry lavender and mulled wine. At this point in my journey, I was willing to try anything. Not in the reckless way you try skydiving after a breakup, but in the desperate, foggy-eyed, please make this stop way of a woman who hasn't slept in 4 nights and just cried because a cereal box said now with extra fiber. So I made a list. It started with sage tea, supposed to help with hot flashes, then soy milk, something about phytoestrogens, black cohosh, evening primrose oil, wild yam cream, maca root, ashwagandha, something called royal jelly, which sounded like a drag queen, but was apparently harvested from bees, and of course, yoga. Because every self-help article, anti and Instagram health coach agrees when in doubt, downward dog. I threw myself into natural remedies like a detective in a mystery novel. The kitchen became my lab, my bathroom counter, a botanical apothecary. I even started labeling my teas based on what mood I was trying to fix. Don't cry, blend rage away, and let me sleep. Please, for the love of God. Some worked, some didn't. Some gave me stomach cramps and made me swear off experimental herbalism entirely. But here's what surprised me. Just the act of trying, of doing something, made me feel better. Like I was reclaiming a bit of agency. Even if that agency smelled like burnt sage and made me burp licorice for 6 hours. Historians still debate whether traditional Chinese medicine or ancient Ayurvedic practices offered more effective menopause treatments. Both systems, with centuries of wisdom, recognize the shift in a woman's life not as a breakdown, but as a transition. One requiring nourishment, balance, and ritual. Meanwhile, my ritual had become nightly tea, a heating pad, and whispering affirmations while trying not to Google whether I was dying. Then came the stranger recommendations. There was one video clearly filmed in a dark basement where a woman swore by soaking her feet in vinegar while listening to whale songs. Another blog insisted on moon-charged crystals tucked into your bra. A friend swore by scream therapy. I tried it once. The neighbors were not fans, and yet I found myself drawn to the absurd. There was a freedom in it. After decades of playing by the rules, following diets, working full-time, raising kids, keeping schedules, I suddenly had permission to go a little weird, to experiment, to throw turmeric into my smoothies and chant nonsense affirmations in the mirror if it made me feel even slightly more sane. Of course, not all natural remedies are created equal. Some had science behind them, some were pure wishful thinking, and some were just capitalism in a mason jar. But I didn't judge myself for trying. Because in a world that often gaslights women into thinking they're exaggerating their symptoms, trying becomes revolutionary. Also, odd fact, did you know that in Victorian England, it was believed that taking cold baths in silence could reset the uterus cold? Baths in silence. If that isn't a recipe for tears and hypothermia, I don't know what is. Compared to that, my warm turmeric oat milk looked downright luxurious. Eventually, I found a rhythm. A few staples that helped more than they hurt. Magnesium for sleep. Omega-3s for my foggy brain. A specific blend of mint and sage tea that actually did reduce my night sweats. And yes, yoga. Not because it cured me, but because stretching my joints while listening to a woman named Cassandra whisper, "Melt into your mat," somehow made me cry and laugh in equal measure. I also learned to listen. Not just to podcasts or experts or random people on Facebook, but to myself, to my cravings, my energy, my resistance. Some days I needed supplements. Other days I needed a donut and a nap. And both were valid because healing, if that's even the right word, isn't linear. It's not a staircase you climb with each right choice. It's a weird, wobbly dance where sometimes you move forward, sometimes you spin in place, and sometimes you just sit on the floor and breathe. And breathe I did, even through the weird smells, the bitter tinctures, and the days when nothing seemed to help. I kept reminding myself, I'm not broken. I'm becoming. And that meant giving myself permission to be a little strange, a little soft, and a little rebellious. It snuck up on me, the weight. Not just the actual pounds, though, those definitely made their presence known every time I tried to squeeze into my old jeans and heard the faint, ominous creak of a zipper begging for mercy. No, it was the weight of it all. The extra emotional heaviness, the creeping self-doubt, the cultural pressure to bounce back or age gracefully, whatever that means. As if I were a yoga ball that had been slightly deflated and just needed a pump of positivity to restore my glow. Spoiler, there is no glow, only sweat. And possibly a rash from a new supplement. You know what no one tells you, that your metabolism gets petty during menopause, like a bitter ex. Suddenly, everything you eat feels like a betrayal. You so much as look at bread, and your body's like, great, we're storing this for the next ice age. Historians still debate whether women in ancient Rome experienced menopausal weight gain or if their togas just had built-in forgiveness. But I'll tell you this, there's something humbling about gaining 10 pounds while surviving on air, almonds, and disappointment. At first, I tried to fight it. Keto, intermittent fasting, some vaguely French cleanse involving boiled cabbage and sadness. I bought the books, followed the influencers, made spreadsheets, and then I cried in my car after a weigh-in at the doctor's office because it didn't feel fair. I wasn't overeating. I wasn't inactive. I was just changing. And that terrified me. So I made a radical decision. I stopped trying to get my old body back. She served me well, but she was never coming back. And that wasn't a failure. It was just life. Instead, I focused on strength, on balance, on nourishment. I traded calorie counting for protein-packed meals. Took slow walks instead of punishing HEET workouts. Joined a Pilates class for women of a certain age where we mostly giggled about how loud our knees were. Did you know flamingos can sleep while standing on one leg because of how their joints lock into place? Meanwhile, I almost fell over putting on one sock. Nature is rude, but little by little, my energy started returning. Not in a dramatic Hollywood montage kind of way. More like this subtle resilience that crept into my mornings and whispered, let's just try. There was one moment that really stuck with me. I was in the grocery store, holding a tub of ice cream, debating whether I deserved it, when an older woman next to me just smiled and said, honey, if it makes you smile more than it makes you ache, it's worth it. I bought the ice cream, and I smiled all the way home. This shift, this quiet rebellion against diet culture and shame became my anchor. I wasn't giving up. I was recalibrating. Because the truth is, menopause doesn't just happen to your body. It happens with your identity. Your skin changes, your sleep, your shape, yourself. And for a while you might not recognize her, but eventually, after the grief about the grief, you start to meet someone new. Someone who's softer, but sharper. Who knows what she wants, even if she forgets where she put her glasses. I began to respect her, to feed her good food, to let her rest, to dress her in stretchy pants and oversized sweaters that made her feel like a poet who owns a bookstore by the sea. She didn't need to shrink to be worthy, and neither did I. So I kept moving, kept stretching, kept drinking water and taking magnesium and dancing around the kitchen like no one was watching, even though my cat definitely was, and he was judging me. The scale stopped being my enemy, and my body, it started feeling like home again. I used to be a champion sleeper. I'm talking Olympic level, 8 hours minimum dreaming in full color, waking up like a Disney princess with birds chirping and a gentle yawn. Then menopause showed up and pulled the fire alarm on my nervous system. Suddenly, I was awake at 2:17 a.m., sweating like I'd run a marathon, tangled in sheets that felt like betrayal. And even when I wasn't drenched in a full-body night sweat, my brain refused to shut up. What if your taxes are wrong? Did you ever respond to that email from 2013? Should you Google that weird twinge in your left knee? No. Seriously. What if you're forgetting everything? Welcome to the twilight zone of midlife insomnia. Historians still debate whether ancient Egyptian women suffered the same sleep disruptions during menopause, but considering they worshipped gods with falcon heads and buried their cats with them, I'm guessing they had something to keep them up at night. Anyway, I tried all the usual tricks. No caffeine afternoon, blue light glasses, lavender mist, white noise, pink noise, rain sounds, whale sounds. That one app where a man with a British accent describes slow-moving trains in excruciating detail. Nothing worked. My body refused to cooperate. I'd finally drift off, only to jolt awake again 90 minutes later, certain that I'd heard someone breaking into my house. Spoiler, it was the cat knocking over my magnesium pills. Eventually, I gave in and started doing productive things during the night. Cleaning out drawers, reorganizing bookshelves, Googling weird Victorian sleep rituals. Did you know Victorians believed that eating lettuce before bed induced calm dreams? Lettuce? Like good night, my darling. Here's your leaf. No thanks. And yet, part of me kind of admired the desperation, because that's what sleep deprivation does to you. It makes you creative and mildly insane. At one point, I started journaling at 3 a.m., just scribbling whatever came to mind. Rants, dreams, grocery lists. And you know what? It helped. So did gentle stretches, breathing exercises, a weighted blanket that felt like being hugged by a marshmallow with good intentions. But what helped most was acceptance. Not in a giving up way, in a this is temporary kind of way. Because once I stopped fighting the sleepless nights, they softened. Not always, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to let me fall asleep on the couch while watching a documentary about moss. Enough to make peace with naps. Enough to realize that sometimes rest doesn't look like sleep. It looks like stillness, quiet, a slow cup of chamomile tea, while the world outside pretends it's not spinning. There's a kind of magic in those hours if you squint. A softness, a hush, a chance to listen to yourself without interruption. I started using that time to check in. How's my body? My heart? What am I grieving? What am I becoming? And in those dark, strange hours, I found a strange kind of peace. Not the peace of a full night's sleep, but the peace of knowing I was still me, even without the dreams, even with the noise, even in the quiet. It wasn't just about the hormones anymore. By now, I'd wrestled with the night sweats, the moods, the memory lapses, and the unexpected crying spells brought on by commercials about paper towels. But one thing still lingered like an unwelcome house guest who refused to leave. Shame. Shame about my body, about my wrinkles, about the fact that I no longer turned heads the way I used to. Shame about not feeling like myself in dressing rooms or in photographs, or even in my own skin. And the funny part is, no one talks about this. Not really. There are creams and serums and anti-aging everything, of course. But where are the conversations about how it actually feels when your reflection starts changing faster than your mindset can keep up? Historians still debate whether Cleopatra used crushed pearls to maintain her youthful appearance or just excellent lighting in her royal quarters. Either way, she probably didn't have to deal with the fluorescent horror of modern mall dressing rooms. I stood in front of one just last week, trying on a pair of pants, and I swear the mirror sighed before I did. But here's what I've learned slowly and painfully. And through the patient unraveling of decades of internalized nonsense, my value has never been in my waistline or my smooth forehead or how put together I look on any given Tuesday. It's in how I show up. It's in the way I listen, the jokes I tell, the messy, imperfect, vibrant way I love the people around me and myself. Now don't get me wrong, I still use under eye cream. I still suck in my stomach when I pass reflective surfaces. I'm not made of stone, but I also wear flowy pants now, the kind that swish when I walk, that say I've been through some things and I don't have time for pants that argue. I've embraced scarves, stretchy waistbands, and the freedom of giving fewer damns. That's not letting go. That's letting in. Letting in the reality that my body is wiser than it's ever been. It knows how to bounce back after nights of no sleep. It knows how to signal when something's off. It knows that rest is productive and joy is essential, and that dancing in the kitchen to old 90s songs is a valid form of cardio. Did you know that in some indigenous cultures, menopause is celebrated as a transition into wisdom? That the term crone, often used insultingly today, originally meant crowned one, a sign of respect. Somewhere along the way, society twisted that, turned aging into something to hide, to fight, to shame. But now, I'm rewriting that script. I'm the crowned one, not because I've figured it all out, but because I've made peace with the not knowing, because I've survived, and because there's still so much becoming ahead. So I laugh more now. At myself, at the absurdity of it all, at how I once thought aging would be linear and graceful. Spoiler, it's not. It's awkward, hilarious, humbling, and occasionally smells like medicated foot cream. But it's mine. And in this body, with these stretch marks and soft places and laugh lines, I feel more me than I ever did in my 20s. So when I look in the mirror now, I try to offer the same grace I would to my best friend. I say, hey, you're doing great. You've made it through some storms. And then I put on my favorite lipstick, the one with the name that makes no sense, and I go out into the world, not to be seen, but to be felt. Because that's what we're here for. Not to shrink, but to shine. There's something weirdly liberating about hitting the point in life where you stop pretending. No more faking interest in things that bore you. No more squeezing into shoes that pinch your soul. No more nodding politely when someone tells you that menopause is all in your head. Because let me tell you, if it was all in my head, I'd be charging rent to the hormonal chaos living there. What's fascinating, though, is how people treat you once you reach this phase. Some speak slower, as if the moment estrogen dips, your IQ plummets. Others avoid the topic altogether, like menopause is contagious or worse, impolite. Historians still debate whether the Victorians' obsession with female hysteria was just a dramatic way to avoid admitting they didn't understand women's bodies. My guess? Absolutely yes. They'd probably faint at the sight of a hot flash. But here's the twist. I didn't expect the power that comes with it. Real power. Not loud, showy, CEO in a heels power, though that's great too. I'm talking the quiet, grounded kind. The I don't need to prove myself to anyone anymore kind. The I know who I am, and I like her kind. I felt it for the first time during an argument with my younger coworker. She rolled her eyes at my suggestion for a project, and something inside me just didn't care. Not in a bitter fine, do it your way kind of way, but in a your approval is not my currency kind of way. And you know what? That felt incredible. There's this unspoken myth that aging means fading. That once you're past 40 or 50, or definitely by 60, you become invisible. But maybe invisibility isn't a curse. Maybe it's a cloak, a magic one. Because with it, you can do anything. Speak freely. Move without apology. Laugh too loudly. Wear bold lipstick to the grocery store. Say no without explanation. Say yes without guilt. You start trusting your gut more too. Your intuition sharpens. You can smell nonsense a mile away. And you stop second-guessing every decision because you've made enough mistakes to know the world doesn't end. Did you know elephants go through menopause too? They live in matriarchal herds, and the postmenopausal females often become the leaders guiding younger generations with memory and experience. That's the vibe I'm going for. Big matriarch energy. No longer competing, just leading. Quietly, powerfully. Of course not. Every day is a feminist manifesto. Some days, I still feel like I'm chasing my own brain through a fog. Some days, I miss who I used to be, even if I wouldn't want to go back. But most days, I feel like I've earned this version of myself. Through every ache, every doubt, every confused Google search at 3 a.m. This is the self I built from scratch after the world's expectations were stripped away. And now that I'm here, I'm not hiding. Not from my body. Not from my story. Not from the mirror. Because the real magic of this phase isn't that you transform into someone new. It's that you finally see the woman who's been there all along. By the time I reach the other side, or at least a plateau on this roller coaster I call menopause, I wasn't the same person who began the journey. I was softer, yes, but also sharper. I had curves I didn't have before, and lines I used to try to erase. And instead of fighting them, I started tracing them with my fingers, like they were maps of where I'd been. Because they were. The hot flashes didn't vanish overnight, but they became less shocking. The mood swings still showed up, now and then, like awkward guests at a dinner party. But I knew how to usher them out without causing a scene. And most importantly, I stopped waiting to feel normal again, because normal. That was a moving target, a mirage in the desert. Historians still debate whether ancient Greek women had rituals to mark the end of their fertile years. Some say they retreated into sacred spaces to commune with the goddesses. Others claim they were simply expected to become wise without fuss. Either way, I like the idea of marking the transition. So I did something small. I bought myself a ring. Nothing fancy, just a simple silver band with a wave etched into it. A reminder that everything changes, that even the hardest parts eventually recede. I wore it on my middle finger, not as a statement to the world, but a quiet wink to myself. Because despite all the noise, the symptoms, the chaos, I'd made it. Not perfectly, not without tears, but with humor and grace, and the stubborn belief that my story didn't end here. It was just changing chapters. And I realized I wasn't alone. There were millions of us as night-sweating, overthinking, brave, and tired warriors navigating this strange, beautiful phase, rewriting the narrative in real time. We weren't disappearing. We were rising. In doctors' offices, on yoga mats, in corner booths with girlfriends laughing too loudly over wine and decaf. In quiet moments, with ourselves learning to forgive the years we spent trying to be something we no longer needed to be. We were here, alive, evolving, radiating wisdom we didn't even know we had. Did you know that sea otters hold hands when they sleep so they don't drift apart? I think of that sometimes when I talk to other women my age, when we share stories and nod and laugh and cry. It's our version of holding hands, keeping each other afloat. I still forget things, still wake up sweaty some nights, still Google questionable symptoms at odd hours. But I'm not afraid anymore, because what menopause took, it gave back in clarity, in strength, in the delicious, rebellious act of liking myself. So, if you're in the thick of it, sobbing in the freezer aisle for no apparent reason, staring at your closet wondering why nothing feels right, searching your reflection for a familiar face, just know this: you're not broken. You're blooming right on time. So here we are, dear listener, at the quiet edge of a long, winding story. Let's slow down for a moment. Let the breath settle. Let the thoughts stretch out like a cat in a sunbeam. Let everything soften, because that's what this chapter of life invites us to do. Soften without losing our strength. Open without falling apart. Surrender to the change not as a defeat, but as a coronation. You've walked with me through sleepless nights and foggy mornings, through hormonal hurricanes and unexpected moments of joy, through frustration, laughter, memory loss, and rediscovery, through the undeniable ache of letting go of who we were, and the slow, sacred process of becoming someone new. You've heard the whispers of shame. You've watched me fumble through rituals and remedies and rage. But you've also heard the music underneath it all, the quiet drumbeat of resilience, the spark that never went out even in the darkest hours. And maybe, just maybe, you've seen yourself in this journey too. Maybe you've realized that you are not behind, not fading, not broken. You are a woman stepping into her full power. The world may not throw you a parade for surviving menopause, but here in this space, I do. I see you. I honor every tear, every laugh, every moment you showed up for yourself when it would have been easier to disappear. Take this with you. You are still growing, still learning, still wild in ways you haven't even discovered yet. Rest your shoulders, soften your jaw, unclench that breath you've been holding. You're doing beautifully. The next version of you is not something to dread. She is wiser, wilder, wiser still. And I can't wait for you to meet her.